Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we're joined by a very special guest, Mr. David Shorunke. Apologies for pronouncing it wrong in the episode, David. Please forgive me. But we have an awesome chat. This is one of my all-time favorite episodes, actually. David has recently qualified to get to the CrossFit Games, and he's overcome a lot of adversity along the way. And there's a huge amount of really valuable lessons to learn and inspiration to draw from his journey and his experience. We get into the details of how to rehab an injury like a professional. And I think anybody who's dealt with a long-standing injury will take a lot of really valuable lessons from his experience, his advice. So make sure you listen to get the full story. But before we get into it, don't forget to click the link in the description box below to get your free 7-day trial to Rob's Strength Formula program, which is your answer to the strength and muscle building equation. Also, thank you to the show sponsor, thetrainingstimulus.com. Please check out the website if you are a PT, coach, or healthcare professional looking to get a next level understanding of movement mechanics. And also, thank you to ZAAG which is our favorite daily supplement. ZAAG is a liquid gel shot delivering 29 vitamins, nootropics, and adaptogens that have significantly improved our concentration, getting us dialed in for work, training, and helping us recover. So if you check out the website, zaagsupplements.com, use our discount code DISCLIFT20 to get 20% off your 2-week trial pack. That's DISCLIFT20. Right, let's get into it. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on your qualification to the Games again. How are you feeling?
Good. Gone through the high of the qualification and then through the low that follows, and we're back into reality now. So yeah, feeling good.
Good. Yeah, it's very exciting to see it all come off. But before we get into the details of that, for listeners who might not be so familiar with you, we'd like to start with a little bit of your story. So could you tell us the origin story of David Shorunke, how you got into CrossFit? Where did the start of your sporting career begin?
So when I've always been doing sports. I've always been involved in some sort of sport. My dad was very encouraging of me doing, like staying physically active and athletic and staying fit. When I was younger, my sport was basketball, and I played that for about 7 years. I was very passionate about it. I still love the sport. I still love watching the sport. But for playing in the UK, it's very difficult to make that your professional sport. There's just not the facilities, at least when I was growing up, that are there in place for you to take that to being full time. As I was nearing the end of that, I was scouted at school for rowing by a company called London Youth Rowing, and they basically go out to different schools and they scout potential talent for rowing. And I actually wasn't directly involved in the scouting process, but I went into the gym at the end of the day of school. I think I was maybe like 16, 17, thereabouts. And as I was going in the gym and started training, a guy was clearing up, and he had just finished doing some testing with the years below me. And he saw me and he said, "Oh, I've just done this testing with these kids. Do you want to give a 1K row a shot?" And I did the 1K row, and he was just like, "Yes," and told me all about London Youth Rowing and how they set up kids with these satellite hubs, like centres that good rowing clubs. He set me up with one. I love the sport. I love the training ethos behind it. It was just a lot of hard work, like the early mornings, the long sessions, mentally very taxing. And because it's such a repetitive motion, like a big focus on perfection, because you're just doing one skill over and over again. So I did that for 2 years at that club, and then did it for 2 years at university as well. After I finished with rowing, I got into more like weightlifting, powerlifting stuff, just to go to the opposite end of the spectrum, because we did so much endurance work. It was more fun to explore the other side as well. And as I was nearing the end of my degree at university, I was thinking about going into the military. I've been thinking about going to the military for a while, but I settled upon the Royal Marines. Went through the entry process for the the application to start basic training as an officer for the Royal Marines, and I was accepted and given my date to start basic training. And as any sensible person that is going into the military would do, I made my running volume do that with very little time to adapt, and subsequently got a quite a bad knee injury. Had to postpone my entry date and rehab the knee injury. And then when the knee injury was rehab, because officer entry happens once every year. As an enlisted, you can go in, there's like 2 or 3 entry points each month, but for an officer, it's once a year. So I had to postpone it the full year. Within that year, I rehabbed the knee, but it was healthy enough to go again long before the next entry date. So I wanted something that was going to kind of like test it to see, can it withstand the rigors of the training that was coming up? And that's when I discovered CrossFit. It was a lot of YouTubing, Googling, watching workouts, going to the gym with friends and just trying to figure out the movements, do the most brutal workout that you can find, figure out how to kipping, pull up, butterfly, pull up, handstand walk. And by time the entry date for the next officer entry for Royal Marines had come about, I had done the Open, done Battle for London, qualified for regionals and come 10th in Europe, and figured that actually there was this other route where I could be physically active and pursue that sort of lifestyle without the drawbacks of being in the military. And so I decided to go down the CrossFit route.
Amazing. And just to close one open loop, I'm sure a lot of listeners are wondering, what was that 1K time when you're at school?
Oh man, probably nothing impressive at all. I would imagine it would be around a 3, probably I think it was like around a 320, 315 to 320.
Not bad for a teenager with not much rowing experience.
Yeah, that's epic.
I think it was like when you're at that age, like if you just figure out how to use your legs and not rely on your arms, you're like a whole 20-second split ahead of everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
was,
sure it's
was
better
you
now, though.
was you quite a big kid then? So since you was quite active and stuff like that, was you quite like developed compared to the other kids and stuff like that? Because I'm just thinking about you on a rower and putting like a fast time. Right.
I think I was tall. I hit about 6'2" when I was about 14, maybe like 14, 15 years old.
Wow.
And then basically the same height since. So I was like tall and skinny, but yeah, like athletic, maybe like kind of like wiry strength. And then as years have gone on, I've kind of like filled out width-wise as well.
Yeah, love that.
Put some meat on the bones. So I guess there's always been the drive to compete. Would you attribute that to your dad as well? That you just loved the competitive side of things?
I'm going straight in deep there, Ash, yeah.
Not here to mess around, David.
Yeah, I think I spoke to Jack Cornthwaite, who I worked with at JST Compete, about this, and like trying to delve in deeper, like what is the reason for the drive to compete? What is the reason for the perfectionism when it comes to skill learning and competing? I think a lot of that does come from my parents, mostly my dad, because he was very he's Nigerian, and anyone who knows Nigerians know that they're very particular about education. Like that's a very important thing. Education and a reliable education, a good job, reliable income, so that you could support yourself, you could support your family, and you can plan for the future. And so that definitely carried over into the competitive side of sport, and also in terms of like training methodology as well, because the same thing that he taught me, which was that how hard you work and how much attention you pay to details directly correlates to how successful you can be. I carried that over into the sport aspect as well.
Yeah, that's something I remember noticing about when I first met you as well, just how, yeah, your attention to detail and your curiosity to fully understand everything that was going on so that you could take more ownership of the process, which was really impressive from my perspective. So I guess we've got up to year 1 CrossFit, 10th at the regionals. So you're thinking, I'm pretty good at this, I want to give it a shot. What does the process look like from then? Like you were just doing it pretty much self-taught for the first year and had some good success. What were your next steps for taking it further?
Yeah, so after I was training when I first did CrossFit. I was training at the University Sports Centre where we worked, And then I got a job as a personal trainer as I was near the end of my degree, and I was like waiting for the next entry into the Royal Marines. I got a job as a personal trainer at a gym, David Lloyd's in Oxford, and they had like a little, what you would call like a functional fitness area that was basically like, it was almost outside. It was just like garage. It was just like a railing separating it from the outside, and that's basically where I did all my training through the winter as well. So it was very, it was less than optimal, we'll say that, for the for doing all the CrossFit workouts. But a lot of it was almost everything was self-taught by that point. After the regionals, I was invited down to CrossFit Cheltenham, and we moved to Cheltenham. And I trained there for about, I can't think, must have been about 2 years, and just, I didn't do regionals the following year, but we did go around and do like lots of different competitions around Europe and just gain some competitive experience. And then in 2000, at the end of 2015, I was invited over to Sweden to do a team for the following season. And that was back when, in order to be on a team, you all had to be training at the same location from the start of the year. So I moved to Sweden, to Stockholm, and I competed on Team Nordic OPEX for the season. And then by the time that season finished, I think we got 6th place at the games. And then the season finished, I'd made like good connections here. I had a job, had a place to live. It's a really good quality of life. And so I decided I would stay here in Sweden.
Great. So let's keep developing the story. I'm keen to basically map out as much of the journey to the games as we can, because I think a lot of people see snippets online and they feel like they know what it actually involves, but we've only got to 2015, 8 years ago. There's a lot that's happened between then and now. So rather than going through like in painstaking detail, what do you think the defining moments were between going in a team and getting your first individual ticket were?
So I've always preferred individual competition, but I felt like the team was a great opportunity to partner with some other great athletes and also get out of my comfort zone in terms of, like, I'd never lived abroad. I didn't really do much traveling. So it felt like a great opportunity to experience that as well. From that team experience to going individual was quite a bumpy road, like everyone's journey is. Like, it's so there was a lot of injuries and things that kind of stood in my way, obstacles that stood in my way when it came to competing and qualifying for the games. And so it seemed to work out that it would almost be like every other year something would happen. So it was 2016. I mean, we did the games of the team. I came back full of motivation, jumped straight back into training, and about 1 or 2 months later, I was just completely burnt out because I massively underestimated the effect, not so much physiologically, but definitely psychologically, of going through that whole season of training with 5 other people every day, going to the games, that whole journey, and then coming back. And so I took the following season more as like a developmental season, 2017, and I didn't compete then. 2018, I did the Open and I did regionals, and man, testing my memory here, but I didn't do regionals. I think I did the Open, and it was the year, I don't know what happened with the Open, but I didn't qualify for regionals. And I'm pretty sure something about the scoring that year and like how the regions were balanced out. The Europe region is also always a very strong region. My scores would have been good enough to qualify for regions in any other region in the world. But in Europe, that first stage of the Open is extremely challenging, and I didn't qualify. And that highlighted something that I'd struggled with for a long time, which is online qualifiers. And like, my ability to perform in-person competition is so much better than my ability to perform in qualifiers. But you need to get through that qualifier stage in order to gain entry to the in-person. So I think that was another year where I did more of the live competitions around and gained some more competition experience, a bit of prize money. 2019 to 2020, I think 2020 was the year that I qualified. 2019 maybe was the year I went to Strength in Depth, and I think that was when it was a sanctional, and I got on the podium I was in third place on the podium, and I didn't qualify for the games. And again, that was, I think, me and Drew Wayman on that podium were the only two people in the world that did a
Yeah,
sanction, got on the podium and didn't qualify for the games.
I remember
Just
that.
how the points spread out. Um, so I went with Emma did qualify for the games that year, and I went with her to the games, and that was very much a, I don't know about turning point, but that was definitely an experience that to me made me realize how much I wanted to have that myself. Because watching, like, being with her throughout the whole process of, like, not just like just from getting there, and like in California where they had the games in Carson, like, you know the games is on, but you leave the games venue, you don't know the CrossFit Games is on. Like, it's just that life in California continues as normal. In Madison, you go there, and from the moment you land at the airport, they've got like massive banners up, CrossFit Games, and then the year. You're going around to like different like cafes and shops and stuff, and everyone's got these little posters in about the CrossFit Games happening. You get closer and closer to the venue, and they're hanging up on the lamp posts and like overheads, and like it's like the whole city knows that the CrossFit Games is on, and they're bought into it. So when you get there, it really is a nice experience for the athletes. And then when you get into the athlete area and you go through registration, you're getting given your kit, and they take you to this locker, and it's got your name on it, and you've got all your kits laid out with your name on the back. It was just, man, it was just brilliant. It was great to see her experience that, but it was also really inspirational for me to see, like, wow, okay, so this is what it looks like when I get to that point. Because a lot of the time when you're working towards a goal, you have an image in your head of what it might look like, but it's not often that you get to see the exact outcome of what you're working towards. So to go with her and experience that and be with her throughout the whole weekend and watching all the events and stuff, that to me was when I was like, right, I was bought in before, but now I'm really all in. I want to get this. The following year, 2020, I did qualify for the games, and I qualified through my second place finish at Strength in Depth Sanctional, and then shit hit the fan in all areas of CrossFit. Greg Glasswood got pulled up for his, frankly, just unprofessional behaviour. Dave Castro was also highlighted as being part of that as well. COVID hit, and for that season, like the highlight of that season was qualifying for the games, but from there it was, to be honest, just completely downhill, because like it was very much a case of, is the games going to be on? Is the games not going to be on? And if the games is on, do I even want to participate and potentially like represent this company whose values do not align with mine at all? They then settled upon the online games, which the online games where it was the first stage was that you do in your own gym, and then the top 5 athletes go through to the ranch. I did the first stage and pulled out on the second day because of a back injury that was exasperated by the dirty Diane, the high rep heavy deadlift, but really was, looking back on it now, that injury was the product of high stress, high anxiety throughout the entire that build up to the games, low sleep, and inconsistent training, and that, like, it was just the perfect recipe for having a problem going into it. So it wasn't the ideal games experience, but it was still like the qualification the first time.
So let's have a quick pause on the story there. Something you've mentioned a couple of times has been the setbacks and the injuries. When I saw you, that was one of the things that struck me from your notes, was just how many and how long you'd sort of dealt with some recurring injuries. And I think a lot of people probably would have given up along the way if they had the same experience as you. So
maybe should have given up.
well, probably not. Like, look where you are now. And I think that's probably one of the main themes we want to draw on in this podcast is, like, what do you think you can put that down to? Because even just the knee, I remember it was 16 years that the knee had been intermittently playing up. So how frustrating is that when you know you have potential to perform at a level, but these physiological setbacks keep getting in your way? Can you give us some insight into the experience of that, and also how you managed it internally?
I think I didn't manage it internally at all. I think Emma played a big part in that management process. I think what you've said there is actually the driving thing behind why I didn't give up, which is that I know that I have the potential to perform at a higher level. And I know that what's stopping me is this particular obstacle. And I refuse to let that obstacle be the reason why I stop. Um, and for anyone who's competing in sport, that you start to get to like 30s, like get to the 30 mark and then beyond that, I think this is probably combined with like the view of society that once you hit your 30s, you've hit your peak and it's downhill from there. But also maybe just like the average age of competitors in our sport as well. You start to get hit by this feeling of like, I'm running out of time and I need to make the most of what I have, the time that I have now, and I need to do everything that I can now because this isn't going to last very long. And I think that with the injury, it just made me more, instead of making me think like this is never going to happen, there's no point because I'm injured, it almost did the opposite, where it provided such like a clear obstacle that I had to tackle. I was so focused on dealing with that it didn't really enter my mind to give up, because there was just no way that I was gonna stop because of something as relatively like small as an injury to my knee. Even though that disrupted training for years and years and also competition, I wanted to at least have a season where I could experience what it's like to train at the level that I know I can train at without being hindered by the pain.
Amazing. And yeah, I think that's a really inspirational message for a lot of people going through a similar thing. So that's great on the sort of psychological and mindset front, but what did you do in the real world? Like in terms of actions, what actions did you take? Like how did you start the process of taking ownership of that situation?
So from when the injury, as I said, when so one of the people that I've fortunate enough to work with is yourself, Ash, and your assessment of my movement and then prescription of things that I could do to help it has been a big factor in overcoming the knee injury. But as I said, that you mentioned earlier, like it's something that I struggled with for years, and like started when I was playing basketball, like probably when I was like 13, 14 years old. I can remember being in the like going to see physiotherapists for knee pain, and so I think I've had it for so long that it almost became like routine to have to deal with it at some point throughout the training or throughout the season. The first step, I think, was to kind of, first of all, the big thing for me was accepting that I cannot train the same way as I see other people training, majority of other people training. And by that, what I mean is that first of all, my knees couldn't handle, they couldn't tolerate the volume of squatting and running and jumping that most CrossFit programs would prescribe, most CrossFitters probably have in their training, and that most CrossFit coaches would provide as well. And so it was about, first of all, identifying I can't do that, so I need to find what works for me. And instead of like clutching onto this this number of this frequency of squatting and running and jumping that I felt like was necessary, but was actually like just, it was irrelevant. It would be better for me to identify, okay, if I can only squat once a week, or if I can only squat twice a week, and I can only run 2 days after I've squatted, and then after I've done that, I need to take a rest day, then I can start to build up my plan and see, okay, how does this look? And after doing that, I then got to experience what it's like to train consistently without swelling and without pain. And then the longer I could do that for, the more kind of momentum that built up. So that was probably the first thing, is identifying that. And then the second thing was also going out of the group that I normally looked for advice from, and the people that I usually worked with, to go and see, are there other people, knowledgeable people, experts that could have a look at this and give me an opinion and like tell me some things that I don't know. And that you yourself was one of those people, Ash, and a couple other people here as well. And from that, it was good because I started to get some new information that are new ways to approach dealing with the injury that I didn't have before. But I also started to identify things that people were saying that were consistent, and so that I would know, okay, this is definitely a characteristic of my injury and what I need to do, because I've had 2 or 3 people say the same thing. So I know I can really focus my efforts on that.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things from our conversation that really stood out as well, was just you having such a great overview. And obviously you're a personal trainer and coach yourself, so you kind of expect a good understanding of anatomy and physiology and training. But I think even from a medical perspective, you've probably just been around the houses so many times that you actually learn a lot about knee injuries in general beyond just your specific situation. And I
Yeah.
think in terms of professionalism, if you want to grab the situation by the scruff of the neck, I think some level of that is necessary rather than always putting it in other people's hands. You know, you can go and see a surgeon, you can go and see a movement specialist, you can go and see physios, coaches, whoever. But at the end of the day, it's your career and no one else is going to manage that for you. And I think the degree to which you did that was one of the things that really stood out, like I said earlier. So in terms of tangible takeaways for the listeners, how would you advise, like, what would your advice be for somebody who's got a similar injury for establishing that nice overview and translating it into day-to-day logistics? Because I remember we had a chat and it was very apparent that you were almost creating like a project plan and taking ownership of all your rehab movements and how it integrated with your training. That was your responsibility, which I always say it should be the athlete's responsibility. But what does that actually look like for somebody who has just been landed with, or not just been landed with, maybe has been suffering a chronic knee injury for a long time? How do they take ownership like you did?
So I think the first thing is to seek the advice and the guidance of a knowledgeable other, someone that you know has the expertise and has the knowledge to help you, and give you the answers that you frankly you just don't have. It's no good like just googling knee injuries and trying to figure, like, you can watch loads of YouTube videos, you can watch Squat University, you can these things are useful and they can give you like useful insights, but it's not going to tell your specific issues. So first of all, I think is to seek out a professional that can help you and assess you and find out exactly what's going on, and not what's going on in terms of the symptoms of what's going on, like what is the root of the issue as well. Secondly is to put together a plan for what is going to happen moving forwards. And both, if you're knowledgeable enough to do that yourself, then great. But what's probably going to be the case for most people is going to require the aid of a coach. And the aid of a coach can also, the extra benefit of that is that you have someone who can be a bit more objective and they can program to you what is going to be the best for you without taking into account your subjective feelings too much and like your need to continue doing the movements that you want to do. And like when we worked together, Ash, at that point, when I was seeing you, I had found that we were getting much closer to understanding what the cause of the knee injury was and what we could do to change my movement and get me moving in a better way so that it wasn't aggravating the knee injury. But we're also looking at the possibility of surgery and if that was necessary. And I think in my particular case, I avoided surgery too much. Like I looked for every possible way to deal with the injury that didn't involve an invasive procedure. And I think if I could go back now, one of the things that I would change is I would be a little bit more open-minded to that. I know that some people take the option of surgery too easily and without exploring like, how can I change how I'm moving, what I'm doing throughout the entire day that could be causing this injury. I did that too much, and it actually turned out that the surgery is one of the things that helped it. So I think in that case, again, if you are provided with the option of some sort of surgery versus working on like the movement side of things, obviously explore the movement side of things as much as you can, but that's probably where the professional other comes in, as there's someone that could tell you, okay, maybe we do actually need to have a look at the surgery side, maybe that is a good option. And then if you do go to the surgery side, or I suppose if you've gone through the movement aspect as well, something that you and I spoke a lot about was the plan for return to sport as well. And that, for me, is something that I was, that even though we've done all the movement stuff and I had the surgery, for me, that return to sport plan was the biggest and most challenging part, because it really is a constant need to like resist the urge to do too much, and to like very slowly build yourself back in, doing frankly like the very boring and basic stuff that you think is unnecessary but is absolutely necessary at that point. And having a plan for that, having a clear plan with like numbers and like parameters to stick to. And like I remember when we spoke, it was things like you would do, I had certain exercises that I was going to work on, and I had like a checkpoint. So like when you can hit like a double leg half squat, that's like checkpoint one. When you can hit a double leg knee bend all the way down, that's checkpoint two. And then like having these checkpoints to be able to tick off was really helpful as well. So having that return to sport plan and someone that can help you plan that out is the next part, I would say.
Yeah, I think that was probably the key takeaway from working together, was the level of detail that you took into that plan. So when we were talking through it, and I was just giving you high level guidance, but you were so regimented with documenting how many reps of exactly which exercise. And what that does, it means that when you have a flare up, which you invariably do with these sorts of recoveries, you could very precisely track it back to a cause. And you can say, I've gone over the top on this session. Where in this session have I been a bit too ambitious? And where have I pushed this knee too far? And you then know. So it's actually giving you power back rather than being a little bit slapdash, doing a generic session, not really paying attention to range of motion, load, stability, all the variables that can impact a flare up. And then you're guessing. And that, I think that feeds into the helpless feeling of an injury, which is so often demotivating. Whereas because you were so, trying to think of a better word, pedantic about tracking the rehab, it gives you power back. And it's like I'm trying to think of the Jocko quote. I can't remember what it is now, but it's one of the ones like discipline equals freedom. But because you are so on top of it, it actually allows you to relax a little bit, because you know all the variables involved. You know you can trace it back to the root cause for a flare up, which means, okay, next time when I rebuild the reps or the intensity, I can be a little bit more cautious around this area. And I think that's how you professionally deal with an injury, rather than go hands off and hope it gets better. Hope is not a strategy. That's the one I was thinking of. There you go.
The what you've said there is exactly, as you know, exactly what I did with the rehab, and the planned out like this. These are the sessions that I'm going to do. These are the sets of reps that I'm going to start with. I'm going to see how that goes. Then I'll gradually I'll start with one. I think I started by doing it twice a day, and then I moved up to 3 times a day, and then 4 times a day. And it was like very, very small sessions, but just constant doses of like exploring like bigger and bigger range of motion, slightly more instability, slightly more loading. And as soon as that, I wake up the next day, and the swelling would increase right after doing the session, and then it would gradually go down, and I would constantly track that. And the moment I reached the point where the swelling would go down and it wouldn't go down, I would know, okay, so this that I've just done here is too much, so I know to back off. And it did exactly that. It gave me the freedom to actually play around with the training I was doing, and to not worry that why is it suddenly flaring up, like I'm doing my rehab, why is it not working? It actually, like, by having the data there and taking control of that, you can very clearly see what's gone wrong, and then you can play around with that. So instead of it just being like this, which is what it feels like, it's actually more like this, where it's like you've got those hills and troughs, but you're making still steady progress.
I loved that, like the meticulous nature, like as you're just saying about all the data, because like I think that does really differentiate between like your average competitor and say someone that does this and wants to get the most out of themselves, because all those little numbers and that, like, it's just such a pleasure to hear. But is that why you prefer to compete by yourself as an individual, because you have full control of all of your all the things that you go wrong, all the things that go right, rather than competing in a team? Or did you just prefer the team? Did you not prefer the team aspect because you didn't get all the glory, say, because you wanted to basically get all that work, and not in a negative way, but you, like, if you work hard for something, you want to achieve, and it's your win. So how did that play out?
I think the gravitating more towards the individual side was simply because I find it difficult to trust someone else with the work that I am putting in. and also trust other people to work as hard as I am and to do all of the little things very well. And I have, since being on that team, met like several people who I know work just as hard and pay attention to the details. And if the opportunity arose, like being on a team with them would be, I'm sure, a great experience. But it's very difficult to find people that do that, and also people that you get along with as well, because you spend so much time together. Like, almost the most important thing is that you're friends, like outside of the gym as well. So I think those two things are probably the biggest reason why I prefer to go individual.
That's good to know. I think so. We've like every good hero's journey, we've identified the obstacle and we've started to overcome it. So we've 2020, the frustration of the CrossFit scandals and the change to the plans for the games. Then that's sort of when the real rehab journey was in its full force the next couple of years, I guess. So take us from knee surgery to now. I think this is the key chapter.
So, had the knee surgery. No, was that
21, I think.
21 had the knee surgery. And after the knee surgery, I decided and like went through the rehab process. And one of the things that was like the things that were the tough for the knee were like the running, the jumping, and the squatting. I'd always been like on the weaker side of athletes, and I would always lose points on the max strength events. So strength was like something that I really wanted to focus on, but it was something that I couldn't focus on, especially leg strength, obviously because of the knee injury. So it was like a constant battle of like handling enough volume, doing enough volume to stimulate response, but not doing so much that would exacerbate the knee. So my first priority, like after I rehabbed the knee, was I basically just wanted to. I was so sick of having to deal with that, the pain and the injuries and also with what happened the previous season with CrossFit, that I basically sacked off CrossFit for like a year and a half and did like almost no conditioning, no CrossFit whatsoever. Just went deep into the strength side of things, explored like powerlifting training, really enjoyed that. Bulked up to about 110 kilos. PB'd all of my lifts. Had a great time.
It's the magic weight, mate. 110 kilos.
You've just come down from a heavier body weight yourself, haven't you?
Yeah, it was 110. Like I hit all my lifetime PBs at 110 kilos. That's what I'm saying. It's like for me, it was giving it the sole focus that it deserved of strength and negating all the conditioning and stuff like that. That might make me feel good, but being strong just made me feel fucking epic.
It's feel better. So yeah, then you know exactly what it feels like to just focus like solely on strength. Like it was, and the whole time Emma was competing as well, and I was supporting her through a competitive journey, open, sanctionals, games, other competitions. But I just wasn't feeling like I was missing out. Like I was just so done with CrossFit. I just didn't. It was great to see her succeed and support her however I could. But I was just quite happy like doing my own thing, just going to the gym, training in a way that I enjoyed and that I had control over every day, and that I knew I wasn't going to have to deal with pain. And the interesting thing about that is that period of time was as well that because I only had the lifting as a stimulus to manage, I didn't have the running and I didn't have the jumping. I started to understand how my knee responded to certain exercises much better now that I did them in isolation. So previously, when there would either be some sort of running, jumping, lunging, or squatting almost every day within the program in some form. If my knee started to get like swollen or painful, I wouldn't really know exactly what it was. Whereas now I was squatting or going through the squat pattern twice a week. So I knew, and I started with less than that, and then gradually increased the frequency to 3 times a week. But I knew that if I squatted on Monday, even though my knee would be slightly swollen and maybe a little bit painful on the Tuesday, by Wednesday it was good again. And then the same thing again. If it was slightly swollen or painful on Thursday, I knew by Friday it was good again, and then it had all the way until Monday to recover. And so learning that pattern, understanding how it responds, took the stress away, which then inevitably made everything else just feel so much better, and probably made the knee feel better as well. And it was only and then I carried on doing that training, and I think I went with Emma to Wadapalooza in 2022. And when we were at Wadapalooza, we met up with all the other athletes in JST Compete who were also competing. I jumped in with some of the sessions that they were doing as prep, and realised I absolutely, like, I did actually love CrossFit, and I had what I'd been focusing on were all the negatives that I'd experienced the previous season, but what I'd forgotten about was how fun it is to train, especially without being in pain, and how fun it is to train with Emma and other people, and how fun it is to compete as well. And so that whole experience, like at Wadapalooza, was what actually changed things around and made me think, actually, I think I do want to do this again.
So you fell back in love with the sport, and then you said to yourself, right, I want to give it another go. What were the steps you took then to switch from powerlifting back into CrossFit?
So it was a very challenging few months getting back into doing CrossFit training and conditioning. Emma's got asthma, but if you'd watched us training together, you would have thought that I was the one with asthma for that first first 2 months. So I think the first thing was managing the increase in conditioning and managing the reintroduction of the jumping and the running, because going through that process of going from just like the strength training back into CrossFit was very similar going through the return to sport process from injury beforehand as well, after the surgery. Because you get all of these new stimuli to the body, and you need to take time, like, to gradually reintroduce those so you can understand how each one is taking effect. So when I started back again, the knee had been really good for a long time, despite like squatting the heaviest that I'd squatted in my life. But now with reintroducing these things, it would start to swell up again. It would start to get a bit painful. And so I just took the same approach, and I would be like, okay, I'm only going to do running, jumping, squatting, lunging on this day. And then the next day I'm going to have nothing that's going to affect the knee. And then I would just kind of like repeat that process. And when it became accustomed to that, I would increase the frequency and maybe put it in another day in the week. And then again, then another day in the week. And then gradually building that up. I gave the knee and the whole body time to respond to the training. And I've just been gradually doing that, like to get back up to a level where I can train the movements competitively.
I think definitely, as it must have been like from getting the buzz from Wadapalooza to then it must have been, I guess, you're being as meticulous as you are, it probably wasn't as bad, but I know if that would have been me, the urge to jump back in and go, right, I know I can do all these movements, I want to get back to it. And it's like, I think obviously you know in your knee that if you do push yourself, it will only hinder you like in the long term. But the idea of seeing, like, it's like hanging the fruit just in front of you, saying, look, this is what you need, this is what you got to do, and you're like, I want to get there now. But as you say, you've held off and it's paid dividends clearly.
It's paid off. It has paid off now, but it wasn't without a lot of obstacles and a lot of just overcoming obstacles in many different ways, both in terms of like the knee injury, but also like other things that crop up as a result of not training the sport for a while, and just general like things that, like, issues that you have to navigate as a full-time, or trying to be a full-time athlete.
Yeah, I think it's a cheesy cliche, but for a good reason, that the setback often builds your strengths. So the patience, the diligence, the meticulousness that came from your injury ended up actually being superpowers in your normal training, their quotes around it, because that's something that everyone should be doing anyway, really. If you're doing a CrossFit program, you should have an idea of which movements have which volumes and how quickly they're progressing, so that you know it's progressive and you're not getting these sudden system shocks. But it's very difficult to do. But you kind of had a practice round of that with Rehab, in that you took a lot of care and paid a lot of attention to the triggering movements, and you just applied that to a broader movement spectrum, which ultimately meant that you could maintain progressive overload without pushing your luck too far. So I think there's a big lesson for everyone, injured or not, in terms of how to look after mixed modal training, that there are a lot of moving parts, but the more you can stay on top of them, the more sure you can be of the line and whether you're pushing past it or not. So that's really cool to hear.
So while you was coming back then, we haven't really spoken about it at all, but obviously I've been watching you eat an apple throughout this podcast, which is great. How much has your nutrition and I love this because for me
You're trying to like sneakily take bites. I've actually got one more, so I'll have that bit now.
it's great because it was just like it's like for us here it's like roasting, it's like really really hot heat wave, and I'm thinking about like an ice cream. And I'm watching you eat this apple, and I'm like, it's just, and in my head, I'm looking at like the difference between like an athlete and not. And now, so my question to you is over the injury, and especially when you was then coming back into CrossFit, did you pay much attention to your nutrition? Has it always been quite just a natural thing for you to just eat well because you was brought up well or something like that? How was your nutrition been over your competitive career?
Okay, so over my competitive career, early on, I'm gonna attribute it to the Nigerian genes that I could basically just eat whatever I want, and I stayed lean like all the time, and I could eat as I want, whatever I want, and it would just like reconfigure what my body was taking in and just turn it into whatever I needed. And then as I got older, that changed, and when I actually did the year about the year and a half when I did just like the strength training, that's when I looked deep into the nutrition side of things, because I went through a hypertrophy phase, strength phase, then a kind of like neuromuscular phase. And during that hypertrophy phase was when I learned more about performance nutrition, how to add muscle mass, and how to play around with different macronutrients and to get the physio, like the body composition that you're after. And so during that period was when I learned most about nutrition, and that's when I started actively probably eating a little bit more specifically as opposed to just eating like generally healthily. And that was previous to that. We already did things like had intra-workout carbs. We loaded carbs around our training sessions. Left fat from away from training sessions, things like that. But then it got really specific when I went through that phase. After that, and then when returning to sport, returning to CrossFit, I ate off of feel primarily because I wanted a lot of the focus just to be on like managing the return to CrossFit. And I knew that just with the reintroduction of more conditioning that I would naturally drop body weight anyway. And I did gradually drop body weight. And that was also something that I had to pay attention to as well, because it's like I was 110 kilos starting to do box jumps again and starting to do like slow shuttle runs again. And so as well as taking time to understand the impact that those movements are having on my body, I also had to register that I'm now like 8 kilos heavier than the last time I did these movements. So that means the dose of these movements has to be even lower than I probably think that it should be.
Yeah.
It's a lot more stressful in my body than it was before. So the body weight gradually dropped. And then at the end of, I did the 2022 season, but it was more kind of like I'd only just started doing the sport again 3 months before the season started. So it was more just to like, just have a feel of the open, have a feel of quarterfinals. And I think actually quarterfinals was kind of like, I'm just going to give this a go, because I had then had the knee surgery about 2-3 weeks after that as well. And that's where like after I'm getting confused. The knee surgery was after the year of the lifting. That was it, wasn't it? So I did the year of the lifting to get away from the sport. The knee got significantly better. I returned to the sport. The knee was better, but it still wasn't great. Decided to go for the surgery option. Went through the surgery. Ash helped me before that with the movement, but he also helped me with the return to sport afterwards. And then that was when since then has been when I'm working back to the full fitness. But where the knee surgery was irrelevant, because like the trauma at the end of that season was almost as difficult to recover from as the knee surgery was. So it was almost like two different points, but they were almost interchangeable, but it was kind of the same effect. And then this past season was when I made a concerted effort to try and drop some body fat so that I could be lighter, and it would help with the gymnastics and it would help with the running. Being a taller athlete, so there are some things that are just a given that we have to deal with, and that is longer ranges of motion, like a proportionally heavier body weight to have to carry around on all of the movements. But there's lots of benefits to it as well. Like handling heavier loads is a much lower stress on my body than it is for a shorter athlete or smaller athlete, even if they are strong, just because it's a lower percentage of my body weight. And things like box jumps, wall balls, that kind of thing, heavy carries. So there's lots of benefits as well. But in the interest of making it easier for those other gymnastic movements, especially in the direction it looks like the sport is going, I made a concerted effort to drop some weight and drop down from about 104 to just around 101 at the moment. And this is the weight that I feel the best at.
Nice. And have you then felt at this kind of weight your strength deteriorate too much? Obviously, when you're focusing solely on powerlifting, like it's very easy to become very strong. But then as soon as you then start to integrate like the endurance stuff, the gymnastics, you're going to understand that some of that strength is going to dissipate. Have you managed to hold on to most of it as your body weight has come down? So your power to weight ratio still is improved, or have you noticed there's been quite a sheer drop off with weight loss? The reason I ask is because it's like I know, like when I was heavier, my joints just kind of like you said, they felt more robust. Like, you know, I get under a heavy squat, I get out through a heavy deadlift, even a bench press, and my body would bounce it off. It's fine in all senses. But like as soon as I then started to come down, and I'm currently sitting around like the 98 mark, like I know when I start lifting heavy, my joints just feel a little bit more tender from when I'm getting to those top end weights. So how have you felt that transition now you're a getting lighter athlete?
So that's quite a compliment. 101 kilos lighter athlete. I like that. Maybe one day. I think, well, back then I was just doing powerlifting and I was at a much heavier body weight, whereas now I'm doing like the full range of movements within CrossFit and I'm at a lighter body weight. So it's also different stresses on the body. But I think joints wise, how I feel now is the best that I've felt in my life by far.
Awesome.
And I think that that's a product of dropping some body weight so that all of the running and jumping is just generally less stressful on the joints, and B, spending a long time being consistent with movement work and making that sometimes the focus of the session. And for a long time, that was the most important thing in the session. Like the movement work that Ash gave me, that was like, I'm going to spend 30 to 40 minutes doing this movement work. Any training that I get afterwards is a bonus. But if I do this movement work, that's the primary goal for today. And then over time, that became shorter and shorter as I felt that I needed less and less of it. And the body just generally felt better and better until eventually it gets to the point where it's just like a top up before each session. And so I think that has contributed massively to how good I feel now. Philip Bisgard, our coach, also very knowledgeable in the movement mechanics area, has also been helping us and has provided me with some different things that I can do to help keep that topped up and also make it fit better into a higher volume training setting or competition setting when you're a little bit limited on time. So I would say that despite the fact that I'm much lighter now, handling the heavier loads still feels more comfortable just because I have less pain and less swelling overall. Max strength wise, I haven't tested a max back squat, deadlift or strict press since I did the lifting cycle. I have tested a max bench press in the middle of a semi-finals camp under a fair amount of fatigue, and it was significant to hit. I think it was 135 kilos, but I think I finished when I finished the cycle, I was at 152 with solid pause at the bottom and press. So I would say max strength definitely has suffered, but probably only on those absolute strength movements. I think in terms of Olympic lifts, all gymnastics elements, and probably to a degree the most upper body movements as well, it's either stayed the same or improved.
Yeah, I definitely feel as I've got lighter as well. I just felt my body just can maneuver itself better. So then, as you're then now, I put lighter in air quotes, because like naturally where you are taller, you're always going to be a heavier person. So light for you might be say 98 to 102 kilos. So that's going to be extremely light, whereas compared to the others. But I found that as soon as I started to be able to say run pain free, be able to say do some like pull ups, gymnastic work and stuff like that, and not get the horrible feeling afterwards, it always made me feel so much better. And it was just like the cost of the absolute strength was then kind of worth being a little less strong to be able to do everything else, because it's like walking around with these like say 3 lifts that you can do really well at is all well and good to some degree, but really there's so much to life that is more than just those 3 lifts. So and for me it's like being able to then like know that, so when I'm with my kids or something like that, like going for a run with my daughter, like just chasing around, I know that I'm not going to just my knees afterwards just doing this little run. It's worth it. And it's nice to have a sole focus sometimes into like an absolute strength thing, but then coming back out and kind of incorporating other elements, say using CrossFit as the example, that it's nice to expose the body to so many different positions that you just feel robust.
Yeah. When you talk about that robustness and like the time that it takes to build that up, I'm trying not to lose track. There are a few things that you said there that I wanted to like put out as like specific points that I feel like would help people, and things that I learned on my journey back into the sport and still learning now, is like the adaptation that the body makes to different movements in a way that I didn't expect that it would make. And so even as simple, like previously a few years ago, I would have thought if I do this movement and it causes pain and swelling, then it means that I shouldn't be doing that movement, or it's too heavy, or there's something wrong with how I'm doing that movement. What I didn't realize is the body's capacity to adapt, and how actually there may not be anything wrong with that movement, and there may not be anything wrong with how I'm doing that movement. It may just be that I need to give it little doses of that movement periodically, and it will eventually adapt. Like to be able to now, I could pretty much now run, squat, jump every day, and I'm absolutely fine. Like at the most, come like 2 weeks into a block, if I were to do that every day, which we wouldn't, because it probably wouldn't be a good idea. But if it was necessary over the course of like competition weekend or competition simulation, I could do that. And the only thing that hurts is like muscular soreness. And I never would have thought that would be possible 2 or 3 years ago, because even the smallest doses of those things was too much. So I think understanding that is really important for anyone coming back from injury, that it may not be that you need to actually, in the future, it may be possible to do exactly what you're doing now. You just need some time to gradually build up to that point. And also the process of like how non-linear the process is to getting to the goal of being able to do those movements, that it is like 3 or 4 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 5 steps forward, 2 steps back. Like it's so like this, that you really have to just stick with it and just believe that what you're going to do, like the plan that you've laid out, can work. Because it really does feel sometimes like you've gone backwards, and it's just that you have gone backwards, but you just need maybe a little play around with like the dosage or the rest. But it can be very disheartening sometimes, and if you don't realize how many like obstacles there are in the way.
Yeah, I think that part there where you said about the fact that it's going to go forward and back, and we have to understand that to go back is normal, because we need to see how far can we push, especially when you're pushing at your sort of level. Like you need to see how much can I handle, and there's going to be a point where you push a little bit too far, but because again that the nature of how meticulous you are with all your notes and stuff, you can pinpoint and say that was why it was too much, rather than so like again using me as the example as like the complete other end of the spectrum. I'll go from all or nothing and go and fuck myself up by doing all these different things. So I really want to do them. And it's like next day, the whole body's sore. And I might have, say, like a sore elbow. And I'll be like, I can't even tell you why I got sore, but I've done so much yesterday this is probably why. Whereas obviously, like with yourself, is in like how it should be done. Is like, cool, okay, this is then what it is. Now that step backward isn't actually a step backward, because it's actually now a line in the sand for me to say, right, this is where I'm currently at, and this is how I can now build upon that and keep progressing. And that is the difference between, like, as I said, like an elite athlete and someone that just fucks themselves up regularly.
Yeah. Well, I want to triple down on this point because I think it's an incredibly important one for listeners to understand, in that load management and progressive overload. I'm trying to think of a better way to phrase this. So there's two sayings that come to mind. One is the dose makes the poison, and the second one is that you can get used to anything if you go slow enough. So what David was saying earlier about having an inflammation response, getting swelling in a joint, not necessarily meaning it was wrong, and it was just the dose and the volume or the intensity that triggered it. So you could do that movement just a little bit less or go a little bit slower. The common pushback people have against those approaches is that they're in a rush and they want to get to a high level, so they can't afford to go slowly. But he is a perfect example of, you can still achieve elite performance with that approach by going slowly, by titrating your response, by load management. You can still make significant progress. And I think people think it's one or the other. They think I have to take big leaps forward to get to a high level, when quite often it's the opposite approach. It's actually that small, incremental, progressive, really meticulous load management, which enables you to build the foundation that you can have a high peak from. And it's a conversation I have with lots and lots of people, and everyone just gets carried away. They're coming back from, commonly a knee injury, and it feels good on like a test 3K run, and then they go run 12K, and you just think it's so obvious in hindsight, but in the moment you just think, oh, knee's fixed, I'm good to go, and I can just do whatever I want. But it's not a digital change. It's not binary that you're injured or you're fixed. It's very gradual, the return to sport. And I think if we have some, it doesn't have to be as meticulous as we talked about earlier, but just having some rough data points of like, I ran this many kilometers this week and it was okay, this much load through the knee, this many reps, whatever it is, as long as you've got something that you can hang your hat on to say, I did more or less than last week, and how much more or less, then you can take some control of the process rather than just leaving it to chance. And I think if there's one takeaway I want the listeners to come away with, that would probably be it.
Yeah, with me, and I like, running has been the one thing where I've actually been quite meticulous with my increase in volume, because I know if I do too much too soon, I very quickly get sore. Like my knees will start to play up. I'll get something a bit tight, and just everything won't go right. So like, I remember like we've had discussions like on the podcast and stuff like that in the past, and it's like going from say 2K to say 2.5K to then 3K to 3.5K. Like, people think like 500 meters isn't much, but that's still another loop of a big track if you put it into that perspective. But most people don't. And it's like, when you think about the trauma that comes in from running, especially as a larger person, and like using yourself as an example, when you said you had to, with this being so much like lower body dominant stuff in CrossFit anyway, the trauma that the knees are going to go through as a bigger athlete, anything that's quite plyometric and like, that has to absorb a lot of stress, is massive. So we have to, as you say, that dosage it really has to be nice and steady. And it's like, for me, I'm quite surprised at myself how diligent I've actually been with the running. As I say, like, I don't want to fuck myself up here, so I've been quite steady. So, and it's paying off.
What you're saying there, this point about being diligent with the tracking, like what did you say earlier, Ash? The slowest way is the slowest.
You can get used to anything if you go slow enough.
Yes. So I understand exactly what you mean when you're talking about like people that they want to get good as fast as possible, so they want to take on as much as possible, and they think, if I can do this, then I can get better faster. And if my journey can be an example of what we're talking about now, I tried to go the fast route for the first 5-6 years, and when I was young enough and as full of meniscus and cartilage enough as I needed to be, I could get away with that. But not long after, it came back to bite me in the arse, and I was struggling. And the progress that I made in that time versus the progress that I've made in this time where I've actually slowed things down. Like if I had been slower earlier, I probably could have reached this point earlier as well. So like even more proof that like the slowest way is potentially like, or the slower way is a better way to go. And that also kind of falls hand in hand with this, like the understanding of like enjoying the process. Like the real enjoyment in achieving the goal, like or the value that the goal has, is very rarely just the goal itself. Like that's an aspect of it, but what gives that goal value is the journey that it takes to get there. And if you're just trying to like rush through the journey, you maybe get to the goal and you're fortunate enough to still make it. But like if you learn to enjoy that process, like the overall experience is going to be so much better. And then you don't have so much of an issue with starting slow. Instead of it being like, this is where I finished my last block, so I need to start my next block here to make progress from the last block. Instead, enjoying like starting like just a bit further forward than you started your previous block, and then enjoying that slow build, and then enjoying slowly surpassing where you finished the previous block, and then doing the same thing again, like just building on it a little bit by time. Over that approach is so much more sustainable, and when you enjoy the process, is so much more enjoyable for the whole experience as well.
100%. I think it's a really powerful bit of audio there. And there's another saying, full of sayings today.
Yes.
Something like time you enjoyed wasting wasn't time wasted, something like that. And basically, if you're enjoying the process anyway, you're winning, full stop.
Yeah.
So talking of enjoying the process, we've got a little while before the games. What does preparation look like over the next few weeks?
So preparation over the next few weeks is from now is gradually returning into, or like slowly returning back into training. The good thing about the return to training, so we've had this past week, like we had maybe 3 or 4 days completely off doing nothing, and then another 3 days like slowly doing like some like easy zone 2 work. Some like movement mechanics sessions, some like very easy body weight movements, just like exploring different movement pathways, very low load, very low intensity. And then we started again on Tuesday, and that's just been gradually building training back up to the volume that it was at before, but also to a higher volume as well, because we know that the volume demands of the games are going to be higher. So the volume tolerance that we need to develop now also needs to be higher as well. That is part of it. The other part is also training movements and potential workouts that we know might come up in the games. So more complex gymnastics, potentially handling heavier loads, mixing movements that logistically you wouldn't get, like because it logistically wouldn't work at semi-finals. Heavy carries, strongman stuff, that kind of thing. That's another part of it as well. Things like heat adaptation and starting to get used to that side of the competing as well, and because that's also like a big factor in Madison, as it was in California too. A bit more swimming as well, and with Emma being one of the swim stars of CrossFit, is me to have a great hands-on coach to help me with that too. That's everything training wise, I think. And then, as with every journey, there are obstacles, and this obstacle for this season has been sleep, which for the previous 6 months or so, I've been getting about probably around between 5 to 6 hours of sleep a night, and then when the stress of the time of the season increases, so predominantly around like the quarterfinals, and then again at semi-finals, the stress goes up, the sleep gets worse. So the challenge for me outside of training has been to learn more about my sleep, what's happening in my mind at nighttime that is the reason why I can't sleep, and trying to tackle that so that I can get better recovery between sessions.
What have you discovered so far for like that, being able to switch off, essentially turn yourself from sympathetic to parasympathetic? How have you managed to be able to go between the two, and what have you introduced now that you're starting to maybe reap some of the rewards from? So you can give us a little sneak.
So the most basic ones, the first ones are just like basic sleep hygiene. So all the things that you can do to your bedroom and your environment that you're in before you go to bed to just help signal the body to start to tone down from that sympathetic to that parasympathetic, to essentially get ready for bed. So all that basic sleep hygiene stuff with like the darkened room, cool room, like reducing light exposure, that kind of thing. The other thing has been delving nutrition wise as well. So looking at what I'm eating before bed and throughout the day. Over the past 6 months, I've changed from having caffeine twice a day to just having it first thing in the morning with the coffee. And also playing around with when I have that, so I'm not having it directly when I wake up. I'm leaving a gap so that I'm then not becoming desensitized to that caffeine. Is having a lesser effect later on in the day. Light exposure first thing in the morning, so going out for a walk for 10 minutes first thing in the morning, like looking directly at the sun as much as we can, or just getting some sunlight in the eyes first thing. Already said about the nutrition side. I got some blood testing done just to check that there's nothing funky going on there, and there isn't, which is good. DNA testing also got done with a company called ZAAG Performance, and we actually just had a review of that yesterday, and we went through all of the different things that are going on in me genetically that might be affecting the sleep, and it turns out that there isn't actually anything on a genetic level that is happening that would be a reason for why I can't sleep, which is both a good thing in terms of like that I know now that it definitely is what's happening in here, but it's also a bad thing because it would also be nice to be like, this is the problem, take this, and then you're going to be able to sleep. But yeah, it gets just from knowing that it's all of those different things that I've done. Like for most people, I would imagine at some point you would probably find the solution to the sleep.
Have you tried like journaling or like reading fiction before bed? Like those two things have been like, I know for me, is like for me reading fiction, it really created this like my dreams were great because it was just because I got it wrong for a period. I was like reading like a lot of non-fiction because I like to learn things, right? So I always want to be learning, and I realized I'm like going to bed and my brain's like I'm switched on. I'm like fuck. So then I started to like I listened to a lot of books because I was struggling to read them, and like listened to fiction stories, and like it really helped me sleep so well. And I never really had a massive issue with sleep, but I found the quality and the depth of my sleep improved massively with reading fiction.
So I've been reading fiction before bed for many years for that exact reason, because it's just a nice way to switch off from the world and the things that you've been thinking about through the day, and just basically just fill your head with like just nonsense before you go to bed, so you can just switch off from everything. And I agree, it's a great way to get away from things that would otherwise be on your mind when you go to bed. Journaling, I have only started recently, and was described to me as something called like a brain dump. So that all of the things that you would have in your head that would play on your mind when you're sleeping, you just put them down on paper, and then in a way to just get them out of your head, but also just to have them there to know that they're there the next day, written down for you to deal with when you need to.
Yeah.
And just also like general like organization with tasks and things that need to be done. Using something called the Eisenhower matrix. I don't know if you've heard. It's
the 4 quadrants, right? Yeah.
It's like you have 4 quadrants, and they're divided up into things that need to be done urgently, like as in these things need to be done today, or it's going to have like a big problem. Things that need to be scheduled into your plan. Things that can be delegated to someone else, and then things that you do not do. And so I've like put together tasks, and I fit tasks into that, and then I know that each day the tasks that need to be done are getting done, and the tasks that I'm not doing, I don't need to stress about because I have a plan for when they're going to get done as well.
Just quickly before we move on from that bit, as what fiction book is your favourite?
At the moment, I'm working my way through the Jack Ryan series, which I haven't read. I've read 1 or 2 of, like, but this time I went right back to the first one. So I've just finished The Hunt for Red October. Nice. Previously, it was a lot of stuff, fantasy stuff from Brandon Sanderson, okay. Stormlight Archives, and that is like, it's just like fantasy world nonsense. Just
mate, yeah. On the fantasy side of stuff, I really recommend Red Rising. Like Red Rising was an unreal. I can't remember the author now, but that talking about like going to Mars, living over. Honestly, I would be staying up too. It was then affecting my sleep because I'd be wanting to know. There's the two books and like the Jack Carr series, like so like about like a Navy SEAL, like It was on it went on to Amazon as well, the Terminal List. So like that.
Oh, yeah. That's just come out on Amazon
Yeah,
Prime.
so like the if you read the books or listen, honestly, like mate, like
Yeah.
this, the best series, and I was like, the newest one just come out not too long ago. I've gone through it already. Like, mate, it's fucking awesome. So I definitely get a read of that. And like Red Rising, like that whole series about like elves, it's good. It's really good.
Okay. Yeah. The stuff. If you like that, it sounds like you would also appreciate. You like the stuff from Brandon Sanderson, the
Yeah, I'll look into
Stormlight
it.
Archives.
Yeah.
And Patrick Rothfuss, he writes. I think I can't remember what the series is called, but the first one's called "The Name of the Wind," and that's
Okay.
also a good one. Yeah.
Nice.
Way off tangent here.
Lunge and Lift reading list coming soon. One I think helpful tip that some listeners might find useful as well, which is why I bring it up. One of my mates suffered with sleep anxiety and is about to have his first kid and is stressing out. He's like, I get terrible sleep as it is, and I'm about to have a baby. And so I think he saw somebody about it, and one of my other friends actually gave him some amazing advice, which was just that you've come this far with terrible sleep. You know you can survive with terrible sleep. You can do as well as you're doing with terrible sleep. So even if nothing changes, you're still going to be all right. And I think that you can take a lot of comfort in that. You know, like if you qualified for the games on 4 to 6 hours of sleep, you don't need much more. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of people sleeping 8 or 9 hours who've got nowhere near the games. So like, it's clearly not the thing.
This is exactly what because the sleep thing always gets worse around competition, and like the build up to semi-finals, I was like on maximum 6 hours a night for like a good month, and then as it got closer and closer on the Friday, with especially like how the second event went on the Friday night I slept 4 hours, got up on the Saturday, I had those events. Saturday night I slept 3 hours. Sunday night, and I wear the Aura ring to like help track the sleep, so I know like I've got the data there as well. And I think like I spoke to Emma had already left to go warm up for her event, and I called my mum and like just updated her on how it was going. And she said something. She basically said like, every time you call me and you're at competition, you tell me about how you've slept like 3-4 hours, and every time you do well. So I don't know what the problem is. And I think it's like you do. It's unfortunately practice makes perfect, right? And you just learn to low sleep. But the other side of that is that like if I can do what I'm doing now on this little sleep, like imagine what I'd be capable of with 48 hours. Be superhuman, man.
Yeah, everything's a bonus. Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. That you've just reminded me of another bit of trivia. I can't remember who it was now. It might have been Bruce Springsteen or something like that. He was talking to an up-and-coming singer, and this singer was like, how do you stay so calm on stage? Like, every time I'm about to go on, I'm throwing up because I'm so nervous. And he's like, yeah, I do that too. That's just how I know I'm excited. And he just completely reframed the nerves to be like, I'm ready. This is showtime.
Yeah.
And I think you can reframe things powerfully if you just flip the script slightly. So cool. Awesome. David, thank you so much. This has been an amazing chat, and I'm sure the listeners are going to get tons out of it. Plenty of takeaways, pearls of wisdom, and practical info to apply productively to their training journeys. If people would like to find out more about you, where should they look?
Probably at Shorunke on Instagram is where I am most active. In the interest of like going all in for CrossFit for this season and probably like my last 2 seasons, I've put a pause on most of the coaching stuff. So everything that I do is all on Instagram now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, David. We'll speak to you soon.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, guys.
Cheers, mate. Thanks, mate, for coming on. That was one hell of an episode. I think I said it in the episode where I was just drawn in for so long just listening to him talk. I should probably say something, because what a fascinating story and like journey so far. And I'm happy for you to be able to now make it to the games and be able to now express obviously the highest level of fitness in such a competitive way. So good luck at the games. Cannot wait to see you do as well as I know you're going to do. As always, if you did enjoy the episode, we would love for you to share it. So, don't forget to tag us on Instagram at Lunge and Lift. Don't forget to obviously tag Shorunke as well. All the details will be in the description box below. But if you did enjoy today's episode and you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. If you're not watching on YouTube, head over to YouTube and subscribe. We'd really appreciate that. And give us a like. And if you want to share the episode there, it'd be really good. Help with the old algorithm malarkey. If you want to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, we'd really appreciate that. And Spotify, you can give us a cheeky 5 stars. Someone apparently gave us something less than 5 stars, put us down to 4.9 stars. So don't appreciate that. But just if you ain't got something good to say, don't say it. No, we appreciate any efforts, but ideally 5 stars. So as always, thank you very much. And if there is anything in particular you want us to cover, get guests or like certain content that you want us to kind of do, drop us a message on our Instagram, or just head over to Instagram or tag one of us and let us know what you want to see. We want to make sure we're bringing the type of content to you guys that are really helping you guys level up as we want you to. So, as always, if you want some discount, you can head over to wit-fitness.com for all your WIT kit and use discount code LL15 and get yourself 15% off your purchase. You can head over to Hydro, your blood flow restriction apparel dealer, and use code LL20 for 20% off there. And remember, if you want some ZAAG when they go back in stock, use code DISCLIFT20 for 20% off ZAAG. But as always, everything is in the description box below. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, guys.